to the November Loughridge Transformations webinar. By now you should see slides and a video from our office in the Netherlands. My name is Jennifer Loughridge. I'm the Principal Consultant from Loughridge Transformations, and today I'm joined by a guest, Diederick Badon Ghijben, who is from Celonis. I'll introduce him a little bit in a moment. So for those of you who don't know me as yet, as I said, my name is Jennifer and I'm the Principal Consultant. I have started in consulting after quite a long career in the corporate world. I used to work for Shell, and that's actually how I got to know Diederick. So I'm a finance professional by background, and I think you are originally, but I don't really know you in the context of finance. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, Diederick?
Yes, my name is Diederick Badon Ghijben, as introduced by Jennifer. I work for Celonis as a customer transformation advisor, and in my Shell times, I deployed and I worked on data analytics, process analytics, combined with continuous improvement. My last role in Shell was more about procurement improvement, procurement optimization, before I moved to Celonis.
Good, thanks, Diederick. So last month was actually part one, and that's where we talked about building a data-driven functional strategy. We discussed the role of data and analytics, and we talked about what the core steps in defining that strategy would be. Today, however, we're going to be talking about executing a data-driven strategy. So moving to the next slide, the question that we are going to cover today is all about implementation and sustaining that strategy at the tactical and operational level. So if you missed part one, you can find the recording on our website, so www.loughridgetransformations.com/learn, and you'll find all of our past webinars, including part one. But today, part two, and I'm really happy to have Diederick here because this is an area where he has a lot of expertise, and we'll get into that in a moment. So as I said, we're talking about executing the strategy today. And you've got some slides to get us started with. So yes. Let me just go to the other pack and we can get started. I think we may have a little bit of delay on the line today. Give people a few more moments to join the event. Yes. Right, there we are. So over to you, Diederick. Why don't you kick us off and then we'll get into discussion.
Thank you very much. Now, if we look at how we looked at companies a couple of years ago, and this is about, well, you can see that 25 years ago, what a corporation was. Corporation was defined as a corporation functions to serve their shareholders and maximize profit. Now that has come a long way over the last few years. Now, if we look at what the corporation is defined as of today, which is shown on the next slide, we will see that corporation has much more purposes, much more functions. So it's not just the stakeholders, it's also the customers, the employees, the suppliers, the communities and shareholders. And very recently, Mother Earth has taken a seat at the boardroom, at the boardroom table. So rather than being very much focused on profit and stakeholders and shareholders, there's been a vast increase of people who are looking at the corporation, who are thinking of it, and the corporation is a entity in the society.
I think you're spot on there, Diederick. You mentioned that you had a background in continuous improvement, and that's actually how we got to know each other.
Absolutely.
And when you were talking, I was thinking, you know, that's probably when for me this shift began to come in, because I started to really think end to end on processes, and processes don't start and finish at the office door. They go outside that, and we'll get into that more and more, but I think that's a nice way of thinking, that it's actually a lot broader these days. And if you're looking at processes, you do think about the supplier, what are they doing, where do they fit in, and you think about the customer and where they fit in.
Absolutely, and what people were doing, and that's what we also got into when I was in the commercial side of Shell. We weren't comparing ourselves with oil and gas companies. We were comparing ourselves with companies who were best in class with their customer experience, and that may be telecom corporations. It may be the future company, the the high-tech companies who are much better, much less conservative of the customer experience. Now, if we look at the demographics, want to make the jump into what happens in the future, and we have heard it. We've heard it over the news over the couple of days, the past couple of days, where productivity starts to go down, where basically some Western economies are getting in trouble because there's simply not enough people. Now, if we look at the demographics of the US and over the coming 10 years, we're seeing that the projected growth of jobs is about 11.9 million. We're seeing that the growth of people in the number of people growing into the labor force is 1.4 million. That leaves a massive gap of 10 million jobs shortage of people to actually do the work. So fewer people, less workers. Now, what's your step out of that? It's productivity gain. It's the only thing that we can do. I don't think we need to worry that we'll be out of jobs in the future. We'll be more worried about liberating the front line, making sure that the people who are doing the work are actually relieved of the things that are not adding value.
Yeah, I think it's really true. I mean, we've heard about these demographics for a little while, but it's now beginning to feel very, very real, whether that's a cafe which is closed because they can't get any waiters or waitresses, tills closed in the supermarket, but also, perhaps more relevantly in our immediate context, when I speak to people, they are really struggling to recruit IT professionals, to recruit finance professionals, procurement professionals. There just aren't enough people to do the activities. And like you say, the solution is better productivity. It's not trying to find more people.
Exactly. And better productivity, more efficiency really doesn't mean that large numbers of people will be laid off. Basically, every company needs to hold on to their people and needs to be more attractive to people to join the company.
Exactly.
If we look further on what is happening on an internet minute, just a bit of numbers in here. I like numbers. I love numbers. I'm not a finance professional. I'm more in we keep the previous one. I love numbers. I love statistics, was one of my favorite topics in university. But if you just see what happens on an internet minute, on the Snapchat, 2.1 million created. That doubled when my daughter joined Snapchat. So it is absolutely mind-blowing what's happening. These companies are high-tech companies, so a lot of automation, high productivity, but still these are the front runners of the industry.
Yeah, and I think the citation of this is 2019, but I think during COVID, this has only accelerated. People have become even more online and more virtual with their interactions. So
absolutely,
yeah, startling stuff for sure.
Yeah, and that's only manageable by increasing productivity. Yeah. So if we move on to the next one, now we see these tasks, we see the number of tasks, number of work, the productivity going up. Now, for that productivity, we look on the next one. For that productivity to go up, and if we map that to the phases that companies have gone through from the 60s to the 2020s, we see the increase of productivity. It has been startling. So industrial automation, basically automating tasks, automating your books, your records, to business process automation. Right. People know at the accept the root, and we'll see business process modeling and business process automation. Digital transformation, basically moving into connecting the various processes. Yeah. The procurement function, the inventory function, the sales order, the offer to cash function. Now, in this, the next stage is intelligent enterprises, where basically simple tasks, simple decisions will be executed or can be executed by machines or right. by robots.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand the distinction between those two last phases, because people often talk about digitalization or digital transformation, and they're already actually beginning to think about smart, intelligent, i.e. machine learning into their processes. I would say, however, the reality, and I think when we were chatting before, you said something similar. Not every company is already in that last box.
Not at all.
You will still find companies, certainly in the business process automation phase. So every organization is at a different stage of this, for sure.
Absolutely. And what we see with these repetitive tasks, there's a solid volume of repetitive tasks that are executed, but how do we get the robots out of people? It's not so much robotizing people. It's basically getting the robotic activities from the people, liberating the front line by putting in more automation. Now, if that automation keeps up with the growth of productivity, then we're able to manage that.
Yeah. No, and I think it's an interesting way to think about automation as a sort of liberation. And I think that's what it is, because you aren't just talking about routine tasks. You're now beginning to talk about also some of the decision making. But those are tasks which, when a machine can do it, the human can do a wider variety of more challenging, hopefully more interesting tasks. And together, the human and the machine creates your whole workforce.
Much more intellectually challenging and interesting tasks indeed. Now, the high value tasks will remain, just as the repetitive tasks, but the high value tasks, let's give them to people rather than the machines, because that's where people will get rewarding. Now, on the other hand, does this mean that people will lose their job? Well, it's not really that scary, which we'll explain in the next one. Actually, if we look at 51% of all of the job activities can be automated. However, less than 5% of all jobs are entirely replaceable by machines, because people do so much more than just these automation activities. They keep the company together, they network together, and they make sure that the company is actually forming a structured group of activities. So yes, a lot of activities can be taken away. No, people will not lose their jobs because of this.
Yeah, and speaking from a finance specific perspective, and I know at least some of the folks on the line today are from finance background, we wrote a blog a little while ago about the role of the finance professional and how it's evolving, and what that means in terms of different tasks, what that means in terms of different skills, and what that means when you're recruiting people as well. As a senior finance leader, you're going to have to start recruiting people to do activities you wouldn't have done yourself back in the day. So there are different challenges around this, but that blog is an interesting one, and I think we've got the link to that at the end of the slides. So yeah.
Now, if we look at that 51% of the activities, now today, recently, a couple of years ago, new types of software and new types of insights have been introduced. Now, these types of software, and it's called process mining software, they show what is actually being done. Basically, we think that we're doing, or we hope we're doing, what's designed here on the left-hand side. We know actually that we are not doing it that way. We hope we are sort of doing the main thing with some step outs and some anomalies to make it flexible. However, we actually know, and what we actually show is that some of the activities are pretty much like a spaghetti of activities. And that's where people spend time that they shouldn't be spending. They should be spending on the rewarding things to serve the customer and to make sure that the activities are running in a smooth flow. This is very traditional to one particular activity.
Yeah. And I still remember the first time, some years ago now, that you showed me one of these spaghetti diagrams, and I was a bit sort of like, good grief. Is it really so? I mean, and I knew it was, because you're taking the actual data from the process, and that's not somebody's drawing, that's a real representation of what's happening with the real data. But I'm wondering, when you're dealing with clients at the moment, what kind of reactions are you getting people when they see these spaghetti charts for the first time?
If they're not, basically good grief.
Yeah.
But if they're not accompanied by people who have actually read this, have understood this, you can get really nasty situations. We had a situation that somebody took a snapshot, and that was a CFO or chief operating officer, took a snapshot, sent this to the process excellence team and say, how on earth do you think we are going to get to best in class?
How can you call yourself excellent? This is
What's exactly
there. Yeah?
This is what's there, and actually it's the same. It's pretty much the same everywhere. So, but it needs a skilled person. It needs a skilled analyst to actually understand this and work this out.
Yeah. No, indeed, it's.
So if we move to the next one now, if we look at how to transform from where we were the one single process to actually connecting it to the multiple process, we've got the legacy substitution. So the old processes being replaced by ERP such as Oracle, SAP, and which ones you have. Then process standardization, we knew about that. That was happening typically over the 80s and the 90s, and still companies are of course doing that. Cross-functional integration and re-engineering. So procurement talking to accounts payable, basically in one value stream. But however, transformation. What if you can look beyond the border of your own process, but what if you can look beyond the border of your own enterprise, your own company?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point, and I like this slide quite a lot because I think transformation has become a little bit of a buzzword of late. Everybody, if they're making a change, they call it transformation, or if they've delivered a change, they say they're a transformational leader. But in reality, what I like about this slide is you show very clearly that complexity and risk on the one side and on the other axis, benefits potential. Transformation is by definition more complex.
Absolutely.
And it's that complexity that drives some of the things that we've talked about in terms of how do you really make it stick, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But you were just saying, what
if you connect beyond your organization, and there are new technologies going to go in place. So we looked at the left-hand side, one process at a time. That's your value stream, procurement to accounts payable. Actually, that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years already, and it's getting a bit of stale and a bit boring. What if you connect the two of them? What if you connect sales to procurement? Basically, you can see what impact your procurement has on your sales. You're seeing the butterfly effect. What if you not only look at it from a process perspective, but also look at it from a location perspective? If you rebuild, re-engineer, reverse engineer your entire supply chain from with the various locations, then you get, and you combine the two, you get your execution graph. Now, the types of information that you can put into here are basically limitless. How about you have your logistics function getting the traffic jam information in, the weather information into this? That will enable a lot easier planning and scheduling of your trucks. The company we worked for, Shell, the planning and scheduling of the distribution trucks wasn't done in the Netherlands. That was done by somebody in Manila. They knew the weather information, they knew the traffic information, they knew the traffic statistics. So that, what if you can connect all that secondary information, not only inside your own company, but also provided by your suppliers or by your supporters, such as logistics firms.
Yeah, and let me just link this back to the conversation Tushar and I had in October when we were talking about building the strategy. We talked about that decision making in today's complex world needs to be connected, it needs to be contextual, and it needs to be continuous. And I think what we're showing here now is what does that look like in practice?
Exactly.
So what you have shown and talked about there is, of course, connected. You've just talked about contextual because you've talked about weather, you've talked about traffic patterns, and continuous, of course, that a little bit goes without saying now. You're not looking at this once a month or once a quarter. You do as best you can to get real-time data flows.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, and this is not tomorrow. This is actually today already.
Yeah. Yeah. Not all organizations, but certainly those who are at the leading edge will be there, and this is where others will need needs to follow.
Yeah. Now, how do you get through this transformation? Now, first of all, in my experience, what we've done before, and Jennifer and myself have gone through similar type of training exercises, so we kind of have the same type of jargon. We see that the number one success factor is a sponsorship, an executive sponsor, of course, committed and high qualified team and business knowledge, what's happening. But the number one key factor is an executive sponsor. Now, what does a key sponsor, what does an executive sponsor actually do?
Well, I'm going to come on and say a little bit about that in a moment. But in principle, you need somebody who's really into the game, as it were. This is not someone who is just sitting on a steer pole, being appointed, not that involved. They need to be fully into the change, into the transformation. And it's not always obvious, I think, who that person should really be. And that's becoming less and less obvious as organizations become more and more complex. And I think you have some information on that in a second.
Exactly. Now, we did a survey of our our biggest customers, about 200 plus respondents. 94% said, yeah, without an executive sponsor, we would never have achieved our goals. Now, the executive sponsor for technology implementation, for actually getting the technology into the company, is usually a CIO or a chief digital officer.
Yeah.
But you do need your sponsor in the business, and that's typically a procurement officer or a marketing officer.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at before, finding a sponsor used to be quite easy.
Yeah.
You would just look at the org chart and would look at who reports to who, which part of the organization that we want to improve.
Yeah.
It's not that way, unfortunately.
No.
Basically, an organization, somebody needs to do the HR administrations, having the yearly conversations, the target setting, and that usually comes from the top. But reality is that companies are very much more of neural networks of people who work in natural teams with an IT professional, a finance professional, a senior sponsor, an analyst, a procurement manager, getting this together. And it's super challenging to find the right sponsor, but in the end, go look at the person who's eventually benefiting it. Ask the question, or ask them the question, what's in it for them? And they need to ask them, what's in it for me? And as a change manager, as a transformation professional, this is the question you need to ask them. What's in it for them?
Yeah, exactly. What is in it for them, and what's in it for their team members, because they want to be the them. And I would say, both you and I are trained in change management, but I would say some of the transformations I'm working, even that's not enough. I'm bringing in dedicated professionals sometimes, because the complexity of the change, the number of players involved, just as your chart suggested there, means that I even feel it's beyond my specialty, and I'll bring in a real expert and we work together.
Indeed.
But let's come back to what a sponsor does need to do. So let's assume you've been able to identify the right sponsor. And we both use a similar model. It's we're both trained by the same people. So let me give a full disclaimer. If someone's interested in the specifics of this, they should go to imaworldwide.com and really find the details. You can also find how you can be trained. So this is their material. I just know that you and I have both used it to great effect. So we're fans of it.
Using it every day, every single day.
So with that caveat, let me just say a little. So you'll see that what somebody says has the value of 1. What they actually do has the value of 2, and what they reinforce has the value of 3. And I think for me, that's the most critical element to that. So what somebody says is what they talk about. What they do is about commitment. You mentioned already committed sponsors. What are their behaviors? Are they allocating the resources? Are they taking the decisions they should be in a timely and effective way? And then thirdly, reinforcement. And that's about reward and consequence. That's not just about money or bonuses. That's really about how you interact with the team, with the wider organization, and do you want to reinforce the status quo, or do you want to reinforce the change? And on my next slide, I think we even say a little bit more about that one.
And that goes beyond the meeting, the steering committee meeting.
For sure.
That's not only just the regular status in a steering committee. It's also about, hey, how are you doing in the corridor, the informal piece around the coffee machine, about the around the water cooler.
Absolutely. So what are the few kind of hazards or mistakes that sponsors sometimes make? Well, they talk about change, but their actions, their reinforcement measures are actually about the status quo. So an example would be, just as Diederick was saying, maybe in the meeting, they say and do one thing, but their chat in the corridor doesn't really support that, and the organization therefore doesn't feel that they're really behind the new change. And there's some things that a sponsor really needs to hold on to themselves. They need to deliver them. They can't delegate them to others. And that's about establishing the case for action, setting up the goals, allocating the resources, and really focusing on their own direct reports, because they're the ones who will have the most impact there. So a number of things listed there. And what's important for me, I think, is the last bullet on this slide. Sometimes sponsors think that they can deliver the change without changing their own behavior. And the whole point of this is, if you want to deliver change, you need to be part of that change in the way that you interact, in the way that you sponsor.
Yeah.
So,
and personally deliver on them. These are typical tasks you cannot delegate.
Exactly.
I can't ask, a leader can't ask, hey, can you join that steering committee? Because I can't join, or can you be me in that steering committee and take decisions on my behalf? That simply doesn't work. It delays, but it doesn't show commitment, doesn't show true commitment to the cause, to the targets, and to the goals.
Yeah. The other one I often see is poor communication. So people might say something at the outset of a change, and then they don't ever really come back.
Yeah.
And re-communicate on, quarterly, biannual, whatever, whenever the opportunities arise. It's sort of, it's been boxed up and done. But no, actually, you need to continue to communicate. Why are we doing this? What's in it for me? What's in it for you? And so on.
Absolutely. And also to make sure that leadership and people who are going to do the job, so sometimes we call them targets, but it's basically the people who will go through that change curve.
Yeah.
They're people, they will have families, they will have interests, they will have a background, they will have also a future. Are they 30? Are they 20? Are they 50?
Yeah.
They will all have a different setting and they all have a different mindset. That requires very much flexibility from the leadership, from the sponsor of these projects.
Yeah, very true. All right, so today we've been talking about the need for automation, what the productivity challenges out there are. We've talked a little bit about how that can look like on an operational level. What can humans do? What do machines do in terms of tasks, in terms of decisions? And we've talked about what that can mean for finance professionals or procurement professionals or anyone in the function, actually, so that the nature of the role is evolving, new skills in their new roles within the group of roles as well. And we've talked about how high complexity and high risk drives a different way of implementing change.
Yeah.
Transformational change is by nature more complex and higher risk, and it needs a more thoughtful, a more explicit role from the sponsor. That's what we've just been talking about. So those are kind of the threads of our discussion today, but I'm keen to see if we've got any questions now. So if we go to the next slide, I would like to open up the Q&A. So you can see there, just as a reminder, if you haven't worked it out yet, if you click on the question mark button at the top next to the leave button, we hope you don't leave us yet. We hope you have some good questions for us. If you click there, then you can put a question in and our moderator will publish them in due course. As you might be taking a moment to digest that, the other thing you can do is give us some feedback. We have a survey which is accessible by the QR code there. So this is the last webinar of the year. Yeah. So we'll be taking a little bit break before we come back. So always good to get some feedback on on how we've been doing that we can take forward into next year. So it may take a little bit of time to get a question in. Nothing's coming in quite yet. And I'm sure there must be people with questions either on the details of process mining or understanding a little bit more of some of the slides that you've already showed and some of the things we've talked about, because we've only, in interest of time, we can only kind of skim the surface of things. We can never get into the full detail.
So in your transformations and the projects that you're supporting, how do you see any? How would you assess the level of data-driven decision making, or is it still quite often based on gut feeling?
Oh, that's a good one. It varies from organization to organization. There's an awful lot of non-data driven decision making happening. I think we talked in the last webinar about some of the things you need to have in place in order to make your decisions straight data driven, and that it's not enough just to start asking the questions or framing the questions in terms of data, but you must give your organization the means to answer those questions from a data perspective, whether that's about technology or whatever it might be. And I think there are still many organizations that I've come across that are lacking some of the basics in terms of clear defined processes, in terms of clear data within those processes to actually make the jump to making their decisions more data driven. I think it's an aspiration that everyone has, but I certainly don't see it in place everywhere. On the other end, what I sometimes see is people coming with an interest in data analytics because they know that's an important thing. But again, without the foundations, of trying to jump quite a long way in one go.
And do you see, of course, generating data, information from data, insights from information, and then from insights to action?
Yeah.
In my experience, these sort of decision timelines can be extremely long.
Yeah.
Have you seen successful companies that have successfully shortened basically the insight to action timelines?
That's what everybody wants.
Yeah, of course.
I have to say, I'm not sure I've seen it fully come to fruition yet.
Yeah.
Something's ongoing, which maybe I can report back in a few months. But yeah, it's a challenge because the foundations are often just lacking. And I see people sometimes making a technology-driven response rather than a data and process-driven response.
Yeah,
which causes a weakness. I'm thinking we maybe have a question.
There's a question here, Jennifer. Yeah, I just don't want to interrupt you. I think it's been an interesting conversation. But the question is, you said that the leading companies are already there, process mining across processes, including the weather, etc. As a relatively traditional company, where do I start? It's a great question. I mean, for most of the startups, this could be a question that, yes, if they have to get into this sort of data-driven or executing a data-driven strategy, then how do they do it in a pragmatic way? Yeah, great question.
Answer is a little bit my background, where I've seen successful companies start small with a strong sponsor.
Yeah.
And the sponsor should be helped or educated to understand that indeed you need to get some smaller changes and smaller benefit, always with the end in mind, with a longer program. But define some items that can be delivered over a couple of weeks' time or maybe a few months' time that are replicatable.
Kind of things you see in those pilot projects, just very practically? What have you seen recently?
What we've seen recently, there were companies who were not collecting their credit notes.
Right.
Basically, maybe you recognize the situation that you go to a department store, you return something, you get a money back voucher, and that money back voucher sits in a drawer for a long time. Now, that is something you could address on a very local level or with a very small particular. Basically, depends on how you're organized with your team. Deliver it small. And once you've done that, replicate everywhere you can do it. Also research in the same environment that Tushar and myself have been in. We did an analysis on people who did a project for the first time.
Yeah.
We trained people on
Yeah.
Lean Six Sigma expertise. The first time they delivered the project, it took about 8 months.
Yeah.
The second time, it took 4 months.
Yeah.
The third time, when they delivered the third project, that timeline had cut down to 2 months. So from a pilot to repetitive rollout is about a factor of 4 in speed.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to propagate. Create some successes, and celebrating successes is of course great for the people who delivered them. I mean, it's probably greatest for them.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it, you rob the company or you deprive the company of replicating, which is where they make money.
Yeah.
Companies like Shell or Exxon or big manufacturing companies, they of course stay ahead of competition by new things, by innovative ways of working, but they make money by replicating.
Yeah,
They
well,
make money by scaling big, scaling fast.
Yeah, yeah, and that fast is, I think, a key. I think it's a good sort of tip. Start small, start local, do what you can control, and then replicate that success.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And make it, and indeed share it, publish it, and not only inside the company, but also outside on various networks, if you're of course allowed to do that by your company. Now, very practical, where we see a lot of benefit. Stay close to your main production process, stay close to the main value stream, your cash to cash cycle. Typically that sits in your accounts receivable, accounts payable, your offer to cash, procurement, plant maintenance type of operations. Also from my background, also experiencing now, how long does it take before a contract is signed with a vendor, or a contract is signed with a customer. Those are the processes that are enabling to your your cash to cash cycle.
And are there sort of technical prerequisites? Because I'm thinking back to when we talked about process mining many years ago now, actually.
Yeah.
It was kind of at the beginning of those things. Although we were very enthused by the opportunity, we didn't actually have in place some of the technical alignment, let's say, to be able to really implement it. So what are the kind of basics that an organization needs to have in place, whether that's a sort of an ERP that is common across all entities, or what are the sort of technical must-haves?
Actually, because most of this work has been moved into a cloud and offered as a software as a service. Basically, companies will not need to buy a whole server and infrastructure park. They will be able to use that. They will be able to use that of the supplier of the software, whichever that may be.
Yeah.
But if you've got an ERP system, typically these types of software will have a direct extractor, a direct link, and will actually already have the models of the ERP software in place. So there's most of the companies have so-called starter kits, and these starter kits can be up and running in about 4 to 5 weeks time from the moment that you actually start, that the company actually says, yes, we go with this. So typically quite quick and quite fast.
Yeah.
And
that's very different to how it was in the very beginning, right? I mean, that's been a real game changer.
When I started this, it took at least about 9 months before you were up and running.
Yeah.
And then the data loads and the data feeds would be only updated after 3 months. It took right now what we did in 3 months now, in 3 months, so many years ago, is done in basically 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. Wow.
So there you go.
That's just a different game altogether, actually.
Totally.
You can do it that fast.
Yeah.
All right, good. Now, do we have any other questions?
No more questions as of now. But maybe I think the topic is so interesting, people must be digesting.
I'm just wondering, Tushar, if you have any questions, because obviously you and I did part 1 of this, and you know Diederick as well. Anything that's sort of come to your mind, also as a an expert in the data and analytics field.
I was actually waiting and dying to ask a question. I mean, Diederick is my coach, is my senior. I have learned a lot from Diederick. And there's one struggle which I've always been after coming out of Shell and then working with very dynamic environment. I've worked with small companies as a consultant and the big ones. The way we used to work with corporates like Shell was very different in terms of looking at the same strategy. And then here we are now talking about implementing a data-driven functional strategy. And then I think you both touched upon a very sensitive subject, the sponsorship. Now, in big corporates like Shell, when we are running a large transformation programs, it can actually mean years because transformation is not about just doing incremental improvements. Now, when we talk about something similar magnitude with the smaller companies, it's quite hard to get the sponsorship because people say they need fast results. In a way, I think Diederick already answered earlier that yes, start small, but we know when it is a real transformation, it takes time. And that's where my struggle has always been that how do we actually get into a conversation where the entrepreneurs of smaller organization are completely convinced and are with us during the whole program while we are running this transformation program, because their impatience is another reason of I've seen big transformation programs failing.
Yeah, no, let me say a few words before I give
Yeah.
you the chance to say something, Diederick. But so if people think back to the webinar that we did in June, I think, with Tessa van Westenen, we talked about pay now or pay later and how the role of the leader in a change is actually about making the investment upfront, or she talks about going slow to go fast. What you don't do, you will pay for later, and you will pay for it in terms of delays and overruns. So all of this activity that we talk about in terms of sponsorship, in terms of the leader's role within change, it's actually about making things quicker and cheaper, reducing your implementation cost. So for me, the challenge is coming to what Tushar was just asking, is getting people to get their heads around the fact that this is actually a cost-saving measure that you're doing by being smarter about how you implement something.
Yeah. Now with the smaller companies, and I'm dealing mainly with larger companies, but with the smaller companies, typically what you see is leaders are actually fixing today's problems. And as a consultant or a transformation, you're also trying to fix tomorrow's problems.
Yeah.
And that's where you would come in, and that also well sort of buys you time, because it's you're not dealing with the urgent. And by the way, the sponsor and the leadership shouldn't be dealing with the urgent either.
Yeah.
The urgent and now needs to be done by the people who are working on operations. Quite often these entrepreneurs have started it all building themselves way up. Maybe it's a woodworking company, and they probably think they can do the woodworking themselves a lot better than their staff. But they do need to step back, and our support from a transformational perspective is supporting these people to actually take that step back and delegate. Now, we said sponsor tasks can't be delegated, but the day-to-day issues and the day-to-day problems that we have are not sponsorship tasks.
No,
they're
exactly
operation
on
stuff.
that list, were they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So how we can help them is put them in a mindset on fixing tomorrow's problems or next year's problems rather than today's issues.
Yeah.
And they need to be coached on that. And you and I and the people probably on the call have on the webinar have that baggage, that background and experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the use of the term coaching. I think, the days are long gone when all the change management professional does is a bit of stakeholder analysis and a chart, and then off we go. It's actually about really working deeply with the ones who are sponsoring or leading the change to help them make the right moves when they need to make it to be really effective.
Absolutely. Now, what's also fun to see, and that's also what you see, we use those spaghetti charts. What's also fun to see is, and this is quite often, people think, oh, that's my spaghetti, that's my whole company, but that's really your the whole company is running. what's the great thing about this? You can isolate the nuggets and the pearls, the good ones, the gold nuggets of where things go. So the message is not 80% goes wrong. It's actually 20% goes right.
Yeah.
And it's all about replicating that 20%.
Yeah.
So what can we do to reduce that 80% and move more and more and more to the 20%? Because companies are making money.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for it. They are making money. They're doing something right. But it's our task to actually make them do the right things more often.
Yeah, and I think it's also, you used the word transparency when we were chatting offline before, and I think that's a great one, because people are usually doing their best to do a good quality job and to do the right thing. So when you see all that sort of complexity in the spaghetti chart, what that represents is a number of individuals doing what they think is the right thing in the moment for the company. And so it's about shedding light on that, understanding why are they doing what they're doing, and if what they're doing is something that everyone should be doing, then that's some information that you can get. Or maybe you try to understand why they're being driven to do those things which are perhaps suboptimal. So it's about creating transparency for what's really happening within your process.
Yeah. All right, we've seen some questions coming in. Are we seeing more?
Is there anything more, Tushar?
No more questions as of now. But the conversation has been quite interesting. I've picked up very familiar words which we always keep on talking. People need to be coached, specifically the sponsors and the leaders.
Yeah, indeed. Well, if there's not more questions, maybe we begin to draw things to a close. So we should have a slide with a little bit of information to wrap up today. So I'd like to thank everybody. First of all, thank Diederick for coming over to
thank you, Jennifer, for having me
and having an interesting conversation. And I'm sure you've created some seeds of thought there with the audience. So I know that both you and I is more than happy to continue this dialogue offline with people.
Absolutely.
And for them to keep in touch. So if we can, here we go. So there you see both Diederick and myself, we have our LinkedIn details and our email addresses if you'd like to get in touch with us. We also have the link there for our next webinar. Now, we don't have another one scheduled. It's coming towards the end of the year, but that's also where you can find part 1, which we've mentioned, and actually a couple of the other webinars that we've mentioned. So you'll find all of our archives there if you'd like to go there. Now, if you'd actually like to have a call with me, you can do that by scheduling a meeting at the link there. And if you want to speak to Diederick, I will get in touch with him and we'll make that happen. So please don't hesitate to do that. I know it's a lot of information to take in sometimes during a webinar like this, and thoughts can only come and questions come a little bit later. So more than happy to connect with people offline. Well, with that, let me also share a few of the blog links. So Digital Finance Organization, Are You Ready? That's the blog that I was mentioning a little bit earlier that talks about the evolution of skills and the evolution of roles for a finance organization. So that may be an interesting one to have a look at if that's the space that you're in. And actually it says Digital Finance Organization, but many of that could be applied to other functions as well, because it's really about, what you do when there's more data and analytics within your organization, and when the decision making is transitioning from purely human-based to machine-based as well.
Right.
So always happy to talk about what we've been talking about today, or about any of the other topics. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you'd like to. And do keep an eye out, because we will share some materials after this webinar as well. So if you've registered for the webinar, you'll get access to the recording and the materials early, so you can look over things again, and we'll send out a little bit more information just thereafter as well. So do keep your eyes open and keep an eye on your spam folder as well. I'm still getting reports that many of our emails are going into spam folders. So I'm sad to hear that, but it seems to be the case. So please do check there as well if you're looking out for our information. So with that, I think we could wish that everybody stays healthy and stays safe, and wish you a good day, whichever part of the world you're in. And thank you again, Diederick, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and have a great day.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.